Yeah, so let's go right into that then, into the ID,
Yes.
because like how we always say, okay, make sure the IDs are correct, but how do we do that? Because it's not always so simple. And this is again back to the PAWS process, is what do we recommend in terms of identification? So let's go back to this. I don't know how many of you guys actually did the practice with the ID tool that we had. If you did, can you write your score in terms of accuracy and confidence level in the chat? We had sent it in the last email. If you didn't manage, don't worry. We can you can try afterwards. But this study was done by another master's student that took pictures of snow leopards in zoos. So she knew how many snow leopards there were in her population. And she asked different observers to then do the individual ID. And then she compared their identifications with the real population. And she found a lot of errors. And it didn't matter if they were experts to non-experts, people made errors. And you know that it makes sense. So these are one of the photos from these snow leopards. So let's go quickly and do just one more poll. And I'm gonna relaunch this poll. Are these snow leopards the same individual? Okay, nice. Ranjana is also sharing. Wow, Ranjana, you're 100%. We're hiring you now. Put your email in the chat box. You're hired. Oh, Helena, you're also hired. You guys are all hired. That's great. That's great news. So this was one of the examples from that training. Any final polls in the chat? Feel free. So the errors reported in that study were around 10 to 12% in errors between different individuals. So we're going to end the poll. Everyone is saying that these are the same individual, which is correct. So we've got some keen eyes here, some people that are very aware. So that's really good. So I have another example, but we won't do it because we're kind of running out of time. But if you do have time and you haven't already, please do practice your IDs, because that is one of our recommendations for under the PAWS identification process, how we can improve our IDs. We developed this tool to help teams practice, and also different, because we often hire interns, we hire different volunteers to do our ID process sometimes, because it can take up to 2 to 3 months if you have a population of maybe 15 individuals, and you can have over 100 capture rates if you're lucky. So this takes a lot of time. And if you do get volunteers and to do this work, it's good to train them. And we also recommend reporting your results in terms of using this tool in your publications, in your reports, because that helps us also understand, okay, what's the person's accuracy in terms of generally doing ID. So we know snow leopards have long fur. We know that they also are not often photographed in the same angles. So if they're not photographed in the same angles, that it's really hard to ID, and it becomes even more difficult with nighttime photos. Just by the way, a side note, I was so shocked with how much fur they have on their side body, because it's sometimes nice to think about comparing areas of their body that has less fur, because it changes less with the wind. But on their side body, they do have a lot of fur, and under their underbelly. So that area can play tricks on the eye, and really, and then it's hard to really do the ID. But another big issue is observer fatigue. So with over 1,000 pictures, we get tired, and that's when errors come in. And that's what the study from Orion and all in 2020 highlighted, that people tended to make many errors, which inflated then the population estimates. And we'll go into that after, showing how errors might influence our SCR estimates. But so what we recommend is careful scrutiny of the photos, but also transparent reporting. and skill development and assessment. So this is until we're able to, because currently under standard SCR models, we're not able to capture that potential error in identification in our model. So until we're able to do that, we really would recommend transparent reporting, scrutiny, and so on to maximize our results. But hopefully in the near future, we'll also be able to take into account possible mis-IDs of the snow leopard individuals. So what to report? Well, report the accuracy, your confidence, and also your sample size when doing for example, the training app. Also, what Kustub just mentioned, we recommended using at least 3 locations on the snow leopard individual to say whether they're the same or if they're different. So Johannes and al's paper that found those errors in terms of people doing ID found that people tended to say that snow leopards are different if it was the same individual, if they couldn't find the pattern, instead of saying they were the same. So if you're making errors and you keep saying these guys are different, of course that inflates the population of your snow leopards. So this is important to keep in mind, and possibly do not say they're different until you've compared 3 locations of that snow leopard individual. What else do we do? Well, we try to have more than one observer do this work. Can one person do it and then the next person checks that person's work, and so on. And we recommend 2 to 3 people to do this kind of ID, and it doesn't need to be done independently. It can be done in a way that you correct another person's work, and then you discuss if you have any concerns about the identification, and together come up with, okay, this is the correct ID. And we found that a lot of errors are found in each iteration, so it's important to get people to work together and do this. Also, as we talked about, it's important to report the number of unidentified captures that you might from your study, because what if there are like 50 or 60 encounters that you can't ID? It's important to report this. But as we'll talk with Kustub, it's better to discard that identification than include it if you have any doubts, because that inclusion into your study might create more issues in terms of your population estimate than just discarding, because that might just lead to less precision of your estimate, which might be okay. And it's not necessarily going to bias your estimate. So I think that's something to consider. And also if you're setting up your cameras over multiple years, you can go back to these images that you disregarded and check, okay, now I know which individuals actually live here. Let's see if that photo is actually this individual, and you can check again. So don't be afraid to discard a few photos or encounters if you aren't sure. And then, of course, we know that snow leopards are territorial, that they'll use a certain area, especially males or females that are resident. So if we know that information, we can use the GPS locations of these captures to check our IDs. So if you have individual X, for example, here on the far left, if you have a capture saying he's far on the top right of your study area, you might want to check that ID, because if they're resident, it's unlikely they're going to travel all the way over there in one season. It can happen. They do go on excursions, of course, and it can be the case, but it's worth checking. You might also have individuals that are floaters or just moving through the area that are not, they're young males, or they're other older males that are looking for new territories, and they might be found throughout your whole study area. But it's important just to keep that in mind when you're doing your IDs, and it can help with your ID process. And finally, we are encouraging people to, as much as possible, present the identification sheets in the annex in the results. So as you can see, all of this is a lot of work, and it takes time. And it is our bottleneck. So that's why we're working with different teams we're working with Microsoft, we're working with David Borcher's team to try to address this bottleneck, to make the process of individual ID faster, more reliable, so that we can go ahead and analyze our data more easily. But that's something that's, as David shared yesterday, a cutting kind of edge in the SCR work with ID process. But then there's another way that you can have errors, is in the way you sort out your data and the way you paste them in one folder and then you paste them in another folder because you've got thousands and thousands of photos. So how do we do this? How do we manage your camera trap photos to reduce the potential for errors? Well, you can use tags. There's a lot of programs now available and softwares that help you add metadata to the actual photograph. And for example, when you collect your photos from the field, from your SD card, each picture will already have in its data maybe even the location, GPS location, if you've set it as doing so, but the time, the date of that photo. So you can add also the species and the actual individual's ID to the photo. And in this way, you can use softwares that you don't need to copy paste, create many folders in your laptop and then lose half of the photos. And then it's really hard for the next person to do the ID because it's a huge mess and there are a million folders. So you can actually keep your photos in the original folders that they were in when you collected the data, which is according to camera trap location. And you use these softwares to check to just tag the photos, and in the software it's sorted along to individual ID. So yeah, so here's just an example of one program called DigiCam that adds the information to files. There are many different softwares though. We found that DigiCam works pretty easily and it's a free software available online. And you might have a tagging structure to tag your different individuals. Again, many options available. This is just an example of how one might tag different individuals. And just to give you an idea, because often it's nice to see more how to do this. I'm just going to share. I know we're almost out of time, but we only have a little bit more to cover. I want to just show you this program. If you can see my screen, this is DigiCam. And you can see that you can input all of your photos. This is an area called Gurdwansehan 2015. And these are the pictures according to location, right? And you can see that on the right, you will have the information. Each photo will have information on the date, the time, and other data that was available from the camera trap, which is tagged on that individual photo. And this program has extracted that information. And it's sorted here according to your camera trap.
Justine,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I think maybe others are seeing it fine, but I can see a PowerPoint presentation slide.
Ah, okay. Let me
You must have shared the window, yeah. Probably.
Thanks. Sorry. Okay, can you see it now, Kusu? Yeah? You're muted. Yeah, okay. So here, this is DigiCam. And you can see here under the albums tab, my photos are for this one area called Gurdwansehan. And they're different, they're sorted according to how they were collected, right? The photos according to camera trap location. And you can see under each photo here, you can get all the information that came with when it came with the camera trap. There's the time, there's the date, there's the time, there's other information about the image quality and so forth, whatever information was provided by that camera. And again, the time and the date. So what you can do then, because it's sorted, and you can see that we've already added names to these cameras, to these photos, to give them individual IDs. And you can see all the names for that one camera trap. There's several different names. And if I go then to tags, I can sort those different individuals by names. And if I choose Benteke, I can see all the captures we've had of Benteke. And you can see it's along different camera trap locations and all those different encounter rates. So what if I wanted to check my different individuals? So I could check, I could pick a few photos of one capture, pick a few photos of another capture, and I can use this nice tool which allows you to then directly compare your different individuals. So you could drag this here, drag this photo here and compare. For some reason, my computer is not allowing me to do that, but it doesn't really matter. This is just an example of how you might be able to compare the spot pattern. Just a funny story, you might notice that many of these cats are called Benteke or so on. They're actually all called by the Football Premier League, the first Premier League. Because our ID master student really loved football. So he's named all of these snow leopards by these famous footballers. So if I stop my screen, that was just a general example of one tool that we do have. There is another tool that has been recommended, just quickly, we're just mentioning, called a CPW Photo Warehouse. And this, what's nice about this tool is it does the tagging, but it also does, it helps export data sheets that you might need for SCR or occupancy. So it has that extra level of, okay, let's process the tagging to be used for different analysis. So I have not personally used this software before, but it's highly recommended by different teams. So we're just going over time a little bit, but we just have 5 more minutes because we're going to go back to Kustu to understand, okay, what really does happen if we do a mistake in our error. And this, I mean, and because it's easy for us to say, don't make a mistake with your error, trust us, blah, blah, blah. But it would be great. We just wanted to highlight this point by showing you in real data what this actually meant for your estimate. So back to you, Kustu.